As I crested the Cascades at Willamette Pass, the temperature fell to 13 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the coldest bike touring that I've ever done. Although when off the bike, I've been in far colder temperatures. The snow was fun to ride in. I had to be very vigilant of ice on the road and passing traffic, but it was an adventure. Locals cheered me on as they drove past, and another told me that I was crazy, which I take as a compliment. From the top of the pass came 26 miles of gradual downhill, which placed me on the much warmer and wet western edge of the Cascades. At this point, the forest began to have much more of that stereotypical Oregon, Pacific Northwest look to it. Also, some cool waterfalls on the side of the road. As it turns out, a childhood friend of mine and her husband, they live in Eugene. So prior to this, I had made arrangements to stay with them for the night. Eugene is a neat city, very bike friendly, and the University of Oregon has a super nice campus. Also, go Stanford. Catching up with my friends was great. They fed me so much good food and made me feel right at home. And we even watched some of my bike touring series from Alaska. Thank you to Madeline and Mircha for the hospitality. Much appreciated. The next day, I slept in, purchased a new bike tire, and left at noon for the coast of Florence. The Oregon coast is gorgeous. My ride to Florence and first day on 101 had perfect riding weather, especially for winter. And in between the intermittent ocean vistas and lush forest were numerous towns with small populations and lots of bridges. Probably the highest concentration of bridges of anywhere I've toured. From that evening on, though, the weather turned toward its more usual coastal Oregon self, with a sporadic, sometimes constant drizzle. To ride in the rain takes a bit more preparation and mental fortitude, I'd say, but honestly, I love it. The landscape takes on a different aura, and whenever a semi whistles by to splash me, I can't help but smile and laugh. Cape Lookout State Park was a highlight. It's a bit of a detour from 101, but it's so worth it. Dunes and forest meet together, which I haven't quite seen like that. And the forest and creeks adjacent to the road are very lush. On top of that, it's much more quiet than 101, so you don't have to worry about very many cars. One other thing that drew me to this section of the Oregon coast is the fact that Lewis and Clark spent the winter of 1805 here, just south of present-day Astoria. They were the first Americans to cross the continent, and are probably the two most influential explorers in this country's history. Blah blah blah, you probably know that already. But if you don't, watch the Ken Burns film on it. I'd highly recommend. Lewis and Clark are a major inspiration to my adventures personally, so I made a point to leave 101 and hike the Fort to Sea Trail, through the woods that they explored, hunted, and lived in for those winter months over 200 years ago. At the end of the trail is a mostly rebuilt Fort Clatsop, which is where the expedition stayed. Astoria is a beautiful city. The hills kind of remind me of a mini San Francisco. It's located about 10 miles upstream from the mouth of the Columbia River. And yes, this is a river. Where I'm taking this video, the river is about 3 miles wide. And now for the star of the show, my favorite new person that I met in Oregon. From Astoria, I turned east to ride along the Columbia River, and after a rainless few hours, it started hailing. Snow was on the way too. In anticipation of a cold night, I scoped out a baseball diamond on Google Maps and thought that the dugout area would make for a nice shelter for the night. But before establishing camp, I stopped by a Chevron for a decaf coffee, not much of a coffee drinker, and there, sitting in the cafe area, was an 85-year-old man named Gary. He knew every single person that walked in by name, and I could kind of tell that he was an institution to the community. So I started chatting about my trip and how he knows everybody, and before long, he invited me to stay with him and his wife for the night to escape the storm. His street is named after him, and his 70 acres of property were bought by his immigrant grandfather in 1917, before there were even roads in the area. Yeah, he has a pet swan, geese, a rabbit, cats, and deer and elk which frequent the property. I kind of felt like Ace Ventura out there. It was pretty cool. He and his wife Peggy were so kind and hospitable. And the next morning, Gary showed me around town to some of the places that he explored during his 85 years of living there. It was an amazing experience. I could go on and on about Gary, but all I could say is that he and Peggy really made my day. They made my week. We said our goodbyes the next day as I boarded a ferry across the Columbia and onto Puget Island. With this, I had entered Washington after 550 miles in Oregon. And after a couple miles on the island, I crossed the Columbia again and onto the mainland portion of Washington. It was time to head for Seattle. As far as these coastal communities go, and the little communities in the Columbia River Gorge, this is kind of a once-in-a-year storm. Getting snow almost to the ocean. The rain is normal, that's for sure, but it's really cold rain that is at some point snow. I get the true Oregon, Washington winter experience. The bike touring portion of my trip was over, but I still had a little bit more time to add to my adventure. I packed up my bike in Seattle, rode the city bus for an hour to kill some time, then carried my 100 pounds of luggage 2 miles to the SeaTac airport. There, I slept for a few hours, rented a car, slept in that, and then the next morning drove to Mount Rainier National Park. I grew up coming here. A couple years back, I hiked the Wonderland Trail, and Rainier is one of the first places to make me really love the outdoors. As far as I've seen, it's the most impressive mountain in the lower 48. I drove up the windy mountain road to Paradise, and from there, with cycling shoes, shorts, leggings, and all, I trudged through the snow.
windy just right now, so I'm gonna go down.
At day's end, I drove into Seattle, bought some pho, hung out in the city a bit, and then blasted music in the car, as one should do. And then once again, I slept in the airport before flying out. As seen from the air on my way home, Death Valley was covered in snow, as were the coastal mountains of Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and my home on the California Central Coast. I can't remember it snowing where I live since being alive, so that was really cool to come home to and see from the sky. And by the way, this was part of the same storm that hit me a few days earlier on the bike. Wildflower season here in California was awesome. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more, and happy adventures.